Louise Yvonne Faulkner was born on the 7th of April 1937 and her daughter, Charmian Christabel Alexis Faulkner, was born on the 30th of October 1977. Both Louise and Charmian went missing together in St Kilda, Australia in 1980. On the 2th of April 1980, Louise and Charmian had attended the first birthday party of Connie Wild's son. Connie was a friend of Louise. During the party, she had told Connie of her plans to travel to Gippsland to visit her boyfriend, and one day later, Connie watched both Louise and Charmian get into a white vehicle being driven by an older man, thought to be 60-year-old George Sutherland, who is rumored to be Charmian's dad. Years earlier, Louise had been married and had 3 children, but after an affair with George Sutherland, her husband had found out and filed for a divorce, and after their divorce, their 3 children went to live with their father. Louise then became pregnant with Charmian and moved into a flat, where she continued seeing 60-year-old George Sutherland. When George's wife, Beryl, left him, but by the time Louise and Charmian had disappeared, Beryl had gone back to George, moving back into the farm he lived on in Parker's Corner. After Louise and Charmian were last seen getting into the white vehicle, their family didn't hear from them again. A week passed with no contact, so Louise's oldest daughter and her grandmother decided to go to Louise's flat, and when they got inside they found Louise's walking stick that she used for her arthritis, and the contents of her bedside table had been thrown on the bed. They noticed a few of her items were missing: a suitcase, clothes, a television that George had bought for Louise, and Charmian's birth certificate. Police decided to go and question George on the farm where he lived with his wife, Beryl, but had no evidence against him to do anything. 2 months later, George sold his house at an extremely reduced price and moved to America with Beryl and their daughter, where they spent the next 3 years traveling in a campervan, but they had to return to Australia when their application for permanent residency was denied. A coronial inquest was held in August 2006 where they found Louise and Charmian were most likely murdered, and a following inquest held in 2008 ruled foul play to be involved in their disappearances, but also found they had no evidence to link the crime to any suspects. In 2006, the media received an anonymous letter which read, "I ran into George Sutherland in Mo in early May 1980 and asked him about big boobs and Charmaine. He said it was Charmian, not Charmaine, and I wouldn't be seeing them again as he had got rid of them. She thought she owned me and wanted me to be more of a father to the kid, and at my age, that's bullshit." Laureen Rahn was born on the 13th of April 1966 in Manchester, New Hampshire, and after her parents divorced when she was young, she was mainly brought up by her mother, Judith. Judith and Laureen moved to Miami when Laureen was 4, but moved back to Manchester, New Hampshire 6 years later, where they ended up living on the 3rd floor of their apartment on Merrimack Street. At the time, Laureen was a student at Parkside Junior High School and has been described by those who knew her as a happy person who had a troubled life and was known to speak about running away and would smoke weed and drink alcohol. Her mum spoke about their toxic home environment, which had fights there. During spring break, 1980, at the age of 14, Laureen's other, Judith, went to watch her boyfriend's professional tennis match, and Laureen had stayed home where she had spent the evening drinking with her friend and 2 guys who were aged 19 and 21, and at some time that evening, Laureen was seen at a shop restocking their wine cooler, assumed by some as an exchange for alcohol. Around 12:30 a.m., while drinking at Laureen's, Laureen and one of the boys were in her living room when they heard talking coming from the hallway, so assuming it was Judith coming home, the boys quickly ran out of the back door. Laureen's other friend was passed out drunk in the other room, and it should have been her and Laureen in the house by now. At 1:15 a.m., Judith came home and noticed all of the light bulbs in the hallway were unscrewed and had been removed. Judith started looking around the house for Laureen, and after checking her bedroom, she saw a figure laying in Laureen's bed, so thought it was Laureen, but when Judith's boyfriend noticed that the back door was open, Judith decided to wake up Laureen and realized it was Laureen's friend in her bed, not Laureen. Her friend was confused and didn't know where Laureen was, and that the last thing she remembered was Laureen going to sleep on the sofa. So after this, Judith started walking the streets searching for her daughter, shouting her name, and around 3 a.m., Judith called the police. Police decided to interview everyone who had been in the house that night, and one of the boys told them how he had heard voices coming from the hallway which had caused him to leave, and that after he had ran off, he saw Laureen lock the back door behind him. So, why was the back door open when Judith's boyfriend saw it open after they had returned home? Had she ran off after her friends? Or something more sinister? Police then ruled her as a runaway, although they noticed that all of her shoes and her belongings were still in the house. Judith soon started to get calls, and every time she would answer, no one would talk, and the calls usually came between 3 and 4 a.m. and began increasing over time. Usually, the calls would be silent, and sometimes, she would hear low breathing noises. Some people think that Laureen was put into some sort of sex trafficking by someone called Dr. C and her medical professional husband. Judith eventually found 3 call charges for a hotel room in California only a few months after Laureen had gone missing, so Judith hired 2 former FBI agents turned private investigators who traveled to the hotel and found 2 of the calls had been directed to Laureen's home, and the 3rd call had been placed to a teen sex hotline that was privately operated by Dr. C and her husband, the medical professional. This hotel is thought to be a filming location for pornography. Police spoke with the operators of the sex hotline, Dr. C and her husband, and he initially denied knowing who Laureen was, but 5 years later, an investigator called him, and the husband of Dr. C explained how many young girls would run away and visit their home, and that Laureen may have been one of those girls, and he went on to give the name of a former porn actress, saying she may know information about Laureen's whereabouts, although this woman was questioned and denied knowing who Laureen was. The calls to Judith's phone continued for years until she finally changed her phone number. Another possible suspect in her disappearance was serial killer Terry Peder Rasmussen, also known as the Chameleon Killer. He was believed to have murdered his victims during the 70s up until the 2000s and is known to have murdered at least 6 people, although he's a suspect in a lot of unsolved cases. Terry Rasmussen would specifically target single mothers with the plans to murder their daughters. He is currently the prime suspect in the Bear Brook murders that happened in New Hampshire in 1978, where the dead bodies of his girlfriend, her 2 daughters and his own daughter were found inside 2 barrels. He also kidnapped then abandoned the daughter of his other missing girlfriend. Terry married a woman called Unsoon June in 2001, and she went missing in June 2002, and her body was later discovered buried in their home. Terry was arrested for her murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. He died in prison at the age of 67 in 2010. Terry was known to move around between California and Massachusetts and was living around a mile away from Laureen the night she went missing. He was the suspect in the disappearance of 25-year-old Denise Beaudin, who lived only 2 streets away from Laureen and went missing only 2 months after Laureen had gone missing. Denise Beaudin lived on the same street as Terry Rasmussen. He was also a suspect in the disappearance of 17-year-old Elizabeth Lamott, who went missing in 1984, and whose body was found in Tennessee in 1985. She also lived close to the other victims. Another missing woman who is also connected to serial killer Terry Rasmussen was Denise Beaudin, who went missing in 1981 with her daughter. When Denise had gone missing, she was dating Terry Rasmussen, and she was last seen by her family with Terry Rasmussen on the 26th of November 1981, when they had both gone to eat at her family's house in New Hampshire. When her parents had tried to visit Denise at her home on the 1st of December in Manchester, New Hampshire, where she lived with Terry and her 6-month-old daughter, her parents got no answer, so they left and just assumed Denise had moved away, so they never reported her missing. From 1984 to 1986, Terry lived in California using the stolen identity Curtis Kimball, and was seen with a 5-year-old girl in his care who he called Lisa and told people she was his daughter and her mother was dead. A woman came forward to say that she had known Terry and babysat for Lisa and a 6-month-old girl when he was living in Anaheim, California, and that Terry had told her both of the children were his daughters. It is believed by investigators that he killed the 6-month-old girl in 1985. Terry went on to abandon 5-year-old Lisa with a married couple, and he then disappeared. Lisa was then put up for adoption, and in 1988, Terry was arrested and charged with child abandonment and child molestation against Lisa and received 3 years in prison but was paroled in 1990, and he then went missing for 12 years before marrying Eunsoon Jun in 2001 and murdering her. Because investigators knew Lisa wasn't Terry's biological daughter, they wanted to find out who her parents were, and in 2014, they uploaded Lisa's DNA into an online database, where it matched to her cousin in 2016, finally linking her as being Dawn, the daughter of Denise Beaudin. No one had known Denise was even missing, as her family had never reported her missing, so now investigators were able to look into her case and link her disappearance to her serial killer boyfriend, Terry Rasmussen, and investigators were finally able to list her as a missing person as of 2016. Katrice was born in Germany at the Rimtown Military Hospital to British parents on the 28th of November 1979. At the time of her disappearance, her father was a sergeant in the military, and she was around the age of 2 when her dad had just completed a 3-week training exercise in 1981, and the following day, Katrice, her dad, her mother, Sharon, and her aunt Wendy drove down to the shopping center at Schloss Neuhaus. Katrice, Wendy, and Sharon got out of the car and went inside the shopping center while her dad looked for a parking space, and when he finally managed to park his car, he went inside the shopping center but at first, couldn't find his family until he located Sharon and Wendy inside the manager's office. He was then told how Sharon was shopping and had left Katrice with her sister, Wendy, so she could buy some crisps, but Wendy said she last saw Katrice running towards her mum, Sharon. But she never made it to her mother, and she was never seen again. Police and military investigated and the local river was dredged, although nothing was ever found, and in 2017, police released an image of a man who witnesses had seen that day putting a child into a green car. Johnny Gosch was 12 years old when he went missing on the 5th of September 1982 whilst on his paper delivery route. More than 40 years later, Johnny has still not been found, but may be alive. Johnny lived with his mother Laureen and dad John Gosch. His mother had been married before with 2 children from that marriage. Her first husband was diagnosed with cancer and sadly passed away. She went on to marry John Gosch and have her son, Johnny, with him. The event started on the 3rd of September when the family had attended a high school football game that his older brother was playing in. During the game, Johnny had told his parents he wanted to buy popcorn, so they had given him the money and he had gone to buy it, but after a while he had not returned, so his dad, John, went to go and find him and found Johnny stood next to a concession stand having a conversation with a police officer, but it is not known what their conversation was about. Johnny and his father then returned to the game, but Johnny asked if he could stand away from them, so they agreed and let Johnny stay in an area where they could still see him, but soon, he disappeared from this area, so John went to go and try and find him. He soon found Johnny in the dark talking to a police officer again, so John brought Johnny back to sit with them and watch the game. Soon after, when they were all leaving the high school game, Johnny pointed towards the police officer he spoke with and told his parents, "He was really nice. I think I should be a policeman when I grow up." Noreen later explained how weird she found this for the fact that this police officer kept talking to a child.
Johnny was a very friendly, kind, upbeat, fun boy. He was so good-hearted and always wanted to help people. He loved having his paper out because that was going to give him the money to save for a dirt bike. We had my older daughter and her fiance to our home the night before for dinner. And Johnny said that he was going to get ready and go to bed because he wanted to be up early and get his paper route done. And then he said, "I think I'm old enough to do the route myself." Because we always were with him when it was dark out there for Sunday morning. His dad always went with him. And I said, "No," I said, "the agreement was if you got to have a paper route, one of us would be with you on that early morning run because it's pitch dark out there and you're only 11 years old, or you're only 12 years old." And He said, but the other kids all go by themselves. And I said, that's because they're 16, some of them. Or some of them do it with a brother. Well, then he said, okay, all right. So he gave everybody a hug, and then he went upstairs. But when he was out on the route the next morning, he did not come in and wake up his dad. He went by himself. Probably because he wanted to prove something. I don't know. But he went through our yard, and the wagon that he was pulling, which he carried the Sunday papers in, it had a squeaky wheel. And a neighbor looked at the clock, and Johnny was going through his yard at 5:55. He came up the sidewalk on Ashworth Road, and partway up to, he only had 1 block to go, and the church on the corner is where they had the paper drop, and all the paper boys picked up their bundles there. A man pulled up alongside Johnny on the street, and he said, hey kid, where's such and such a street? And Johnny didn't stop to talk. The other boy, paper boy, saw him and said Johnny never stopped. He just kept walking. And the man made a U-turn in the middle of the street, and by the time Johnny got to the corner where his bundles of papers were, that man had pulled his car into right next to the curb. He opened up his passenger door and slid over and put his feet out on the curb. He kept asking the kids for directions. Johnny told Mike, the 16-year-old that was there folding his papers, that the man seemed weird. The man was slurring his words, like maybe a speech impediment, or maybe he was drunk. I don't know. So Johnny at that point became very nervous, and he said, I'm scared. He said, I'm going home. And he had our little dog with him. So Johnny started down the street, leaving Mike alone at the corner. The man got back in his car. He slid back in, shut the door, passenger door, and then started the engine. He then reached up and flicked the dome light 3 times. And then he sped away. The morning that Johnny was kidnapped and we discovered that he was gone, I called the police right away. It took about 45 minutes for them to arrive to our house, and we only lived 10 blocks from the police department. And in the meantime, while I was waiting, I called the district manager for the newspaper and got the location and contact information for all of the paper boys that were at the corner that morning. And there was also one adult that came to the corner. It was an attorney that was picking up his son's papers. So he saw the man and the license plate as well. So I had all of that information, and I had already talked to the families of the boys that were there that morning. I heard all about the man, the car, what he did, turning around in the middle of the street, then chasing away, and then the man on foot following Johnny. Well, that spelled kidnapping to me. Finally, the police officer came, and we filled out a missing persons report. So I told him what the witnesses had told me. And he said, yeah, well, how many more times had your son run away? I said, my son never ran away, not once, not today either. Didn't you hear what I said? There's foul play here. And he said, I'll go check with the other families. Well, a while later, I get a call from one of the other mothers. And she said, that cop that came over here never even brought in a tablet, a notebook, or a piece of paper to write down anything my son told him that he saw that morning that led to your boy being taken. The witnesses all knew it was a kidnapping. The attorney knew. He tried to tell the police chief. And the police chief ruled that Johnny was a runaway. Therefore, they wouldn't look, because nobody looked for runaways back then. The kidnapping of Johnny Gosch, because of the particular timing, because of the issues with it, with the police and the FBI, and because they waited so long, led to Johnny's case not only changing legislation because I wrote it and got it passed, but secondly, people took another look at this crime and thought, oh my word, those poor people. What are they doing? They had to hire people to look for their son? Society changed totally in the fact that they were looking more for closure. Yeah, we always hear about these cases way over there where a boy or a girl are missing. But when it starts to happen in your neighborhoods that are just peaceful, and the parents get that kind of reaction from law enforcement, it struck a nerve with other parents. They didn't want to be us. The anniversary, 40th anniversary of Johnny's kidnapping is coming up real soon. What goes through my mind, and is daily right now, is how far we've come as a nation as far as protecting children. However, human trafficking is still raging. It generates as much money every year as drug sales. Now that's saying something. If Johnny would possibly hear or see this interview, what I would say to him is, I love you so much, and I am so sorry that this happened in your life. But if you have survived this and have grown to be a man, I am doubly proud of you because you had the odds against you throughout all of this, and you did it. You did it. And I'm still here. I move around a little bit. I'm not, I still live in Des Moines, but you can find me, contact me, and let me know if you're okay. I love you, son.
Although police first ruled his disappearance as a runaway, they later classed it as a kidnapping. A few months after he disappeared, a witness came forward claiming they had seen him in Tulsa, Oklahoma screaming for help as two men dragged him away. His disappearance may have links to the disappearance of two other boys from the same town. On the 12th of August 1984, Eugene Martin was on his paper round when he went missing, and in 1986, 13-year-old Mark James Warren Allen told his mom he was going to walk over to his friend's house, but he never made it there, and neither of the boys have ever been seen since. In 1985, Noreen was sent a letter from 19-year-old Robert Herman Meyer, a man who lived in Saginaw, Michigan. The letter explained that he was part of a motorbike club when Johnny Gosch had been kidnapped, and the club he was a part of was responsible for Johnny's kidnapping, and it was part of a large-scale child slavery ring. Robert Herman Meyer asked for and received $11,000 from the Gosch family. He then asked for a further $100,000 in exchange for Johnny's return. He was soon arrested at the Canadian border and charged by the FBI with fraud by wire. A newspaper article wrote how Robert Herman Meyer had said he knew for a fact that Johnny Gosch was being held in Mexico City. He also explained in his letter that whilst in the motorbike club, his purpose was of a guard in the operations of selling children as slaves, and that he had stood watch over around 200 children in that time and had given at least 30 children to an auction, and he claims one of those children was Johnny Gosch. He went on to claim how Johnny was sold to a high-level drug dealer who lived in Mexico City. Noreen Gosch felt at the time the FBI ruined their chances of finding their son by not taking it seriously.
An inmate, Paul Bonacci, comes forward with a startling claim that a network of pedophiles forced him to help abduct Johnny Gosch. Bonacci was serving time for sexual assault on a child. West Des Moines police never did question Bonacci on their own.
Noreen Gosch was called to testify in his 1999 trial, and that's when she made a bombshell claim of her own, that Johnny visited her in her home 2 years earlier for about an hour.
He told me how he was kidnapped. At first he was so drugged that he didn't know where he was at, but he could then relate some of the names of the people that were around him, that he was able to latch on to names. He told me how they traveled all over the country. They were used for pornography, prostitution, compromising businessmen and politicians sexually. These kids were used in a royal fashion like none of us would ever dream of.
A West Des Moines police officer said that Laureen had told similar stories before, only to recant them later. There were never any witnesses that verified her claim.
Laureen claimed that at some point in March 1997, she was woken up at 2:30 a.m. to someone knocking at her door. She opened it to find her son, Johnny, who would have been 27 at that time, standing there with an unknown man next to him. She immediately recognized her son and said he lifted up his shirt to show her a birthmark that was on his chest. He then came into her apartment with the unknown man and spoke to her for an hour and a half. Laureen said the unknown man stood beside Johnny and that Johnny would often look to the man for approval to speak. Laureen said that Johnny was wearing jeans, a coat and a shirt, and that his hair was now shoulder length and had been dyed black, and that during their conversation, he didn't tell her where he was now living. On the 1st of September 2006, Laureen said she found photographs on her front doorstep and that one of the photos showed 3 boys bound and gagged and the other picture showed her son, Johnny, gagged with his hands and feet tied, and she later claimed that the pictures had originated on a pornographic website. On the 13th of September, Des Moines police were sent a letter which read, "Gentlemen, someone played a reprehensible joke on a grieving mother." The photo in question is not one of her son but of 3 boys in Tampa, Florida about 1979 to 80, challenging each other to an escape contest. There was an investigation concerning that picture, made by the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office. No charges were filed, and no wrongdoing was established. The lead detective on the case was named Zalva. This allegation should be easy enough to check out. Nelson Zalva, a detective for the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office, confirmed that he had investigated those photographs in the 1970s, before Johnny Gosch had gone missing, and had found no evidence of any wrongdoing. In 1989, 21-year-old Paul Bonacci told his attorney how he had been forced to participate in the abduction of Johnny Gosch when he was a teenager and that he himself was sold into a human trafficking ring. Laureen went to meet Paul Bonacci and said she felt he was telling the truth and claimed he had known things that only her son knew, such as where his birthmark was, although most of these details had been widely spoken about in the media. The FBI said he was not a credible witness, and his own siblings said he could not have participated in Johnny Gosch's abduction as he had actually been at home at that time.
What thing would there have been that might have changed the course of the investigation?
I still think of Johnny as a 12-year-old. I don't think of him as a 50-year-old adult now. What I think of most is that I cannot believe that somebody has not come forward with information or whatever.
John and Laureen Gosch are living with a painful 40-year-old mystery, a mystery that may never be solved. What happened to their 12-year-old son Johnny on a quiet Sunday morning in 1982?
My belief is based on what I've learned through the information we got that we could verify, and that was that he was kidnapped off the street while doing his paper route, and he was put into what they now call human trafficking.
And everybody wants to know, you want to know, it's just such a mystery. What do you think happened to him?
I have no idea. No idea. Probably chances are pretty high that he never will be found, along with lots of other kids.
Will he ever be found?
I don't know that he would. I don't. And at this very second, I don't know if he's alive or not right now.
What is life like now for John and Laureen?
And 40 years also means everything slows down. There isn't the day-to-day need for action.
I think about it all the time. Every time I'm driving, if I see something white in the ditch, my eyes go directly toward it. He was wearing a white sweatshirt, Kim's Academy sweatshirt, apparently, when he was taken. And so that is locked into my brain, that something white out there that I look at all the time.
When days go by, you just wonder if he's even going to come back.
After Johnny disappeared, the Gosches became known worldwide. The investigation continued for days, weeks, months, now decades. They worked nonstop trying to find their son. 40 years later, life has calmed down.
And now I'm at a point in my life where I can have a life and some happiness and some good times too. And it makes a difference. It helps.
They wonder what Johnny would be like at age 52, what he missed after 40 years.
It's just hard to even think that way. Hoping that he would have went through college like his brother and sister did and all that stuff, but it just stops at 12 years old.
The Gosches say they will never give up hope, and time does have a way of healing their wounds.
The hope is pretty well gone. I just would like to have a closure before I die, but you just don't know.
And I would like to hope that Johnny would be still alive, and
Stephen Pearsall's disappearance has been linked by investigators to the Lewis-Clark Valley murders, a number of homicides which happened in northern Idaho between 1979 to 1982. Looking into these murders and disappearances, law enforcement have been able to identify at least 4 victims. Christina White was a 12-year-old girl who was last seen on the 28th of April 1979 in Asotin, Washington. She had attended the Asotin County Fair and she had phoned her mom from her friend's house that day at 2:30 p.m., telling her mom how she felt ill, but her mom had no car to pick her up with, so advised her to lay down and rest, then come home when she was feeling better. Because she didn't call her mom after this, her mom assumed she was feeling better and that she had gone back to the fair. Sometime between the hours of 7 and 10 p.m., she was seen walking along 2nd Street, but when her mom turned up to collect her, she was nowhere to be found. Her friends confirmed that they had seen her walking home, and a few weeks after she went missing, her schoolwork was found ripped to pieces in a field. Kristen Noel David was a 22-year-old student at the University of Idaho. She was last seen alive on the 26th of June 1981 when she was seen traveling from Moscow, Idaho, south on UDS Highway 95 going towards Lewiston, Idaho. Her remains were found on the 4th of July 1981, dismembered, in and around Snake River, 6 miles away from Clarkston, Washington. The next day, a few of her bones were also found further down the river. Her body parts had been wrapped in newspaper and hidden in black plastic bags. Her clothes and her bike have never been found, and witnesses who were traveling along Highway 95 that day say they saw a man in a brown car approach Kristen, and that same man had tried talking to numerous other female pedestrians and cyclists that day on Highway 95. Christina Diane Nelson, 21, and her stepsister Jacqueline Ann Miller, 18, both went missing on their walk to the grocery store from Christina's apartment in Lewiston, Idaho on the 12th of September 1982. That same day, Stephen Pearsall, 35, also disappeared from the Lewiston Civic Theater where he had worked as a janitor. That day, he asked his friends to drive him to the Lewiston Civic Theater so he could do his laundry there and attend clarinet practice. He was never seen again, and his clarinet was found still in the theater. Stephen Pearsall had been well known to both Christina and Jacqueline, and they were all really close friends, and he only lived a few streets away from them. On Christina and Jacqueline's walk to the grocery store that day, they would have had to have walked past the Lewiston Civic Theater, so they may have gone inside the theater. Christina had worked as the janitor there before she had quit, and Stephen was given the job of the janitor. Christina and Jacqueline's remains were found on the 19th of March 1984 in a rural area near Kendrick, Idaho. In the autopsies, they could not find Christina's cause of death, but could determine that Jacqueline's manner of death was homicide. Stephen has never been found, and although investigators had initially believed Stephen was involved in their murders, they later decided he was possibly another victim and believe he was likely murdered when he had witnessed Christina and Jacqueline's murders. In 1995, police working on the cases announced that Christina, Jacqueline, and Stephen were most likely all murdered inside the Lewiston Civic Theater by another employee who worked there. This suspect was working at the theater the day they had all gone missing, and he was also living in the home where Christina White, the first case where she had gone to the fair, then called her mother from her friend's house to say she felt ill. He lived in her friend's home where she had made the phone call to her mother from, before she also went missing. Also, in a 2009 report, it was said that Kristen David, whose dismembered remains were found wrapped in newspapers along Snake River, had also spent time working at the Lewiston Civic Theater and may have known the same suspect who had also worked there. This suspect is connected to each of the victims in some way, from where they had worked, to living in the house where one was last seen in. Tony Jones was a 20-year-old native of Perth, in Western Australia, and at the time of his disappearance, he had taken a 6-month working holiday, exploring North Queensland, hitchhiking with his brother Tim. On the evening of the 3rd of November 1982, he called his older brother Mark from a phone box in Townsville to let him know he would be home soon, and told him he was sleeping on beaches and was recently finding it harder to hitch rides. That night, he managed to hitch a ride out of Townsville, and he had plans to meet his brother Tim in Mount Isa and told him he would arrive there within 1 or 2 days. But Tony never arrived to meet his brother. During his holiday exploring Australia, he had been continuously withdrawing around $8 a day, but by the time he had gone missing, his bank balance was only $2.99, and on the phone call he had placed to his brother, he mentioned he was using his last call due to not having any more money. A witness came forward to police and said he had joined Tony, who had been with an older man the day he went missing, and Tony and the older man were at the Rising Sun Hotel in Townsville, and the older man told the witness how he had picked Tony up earlier that day, and he and Tony then went down to the pub to eat and were heading to Charters Towers. The witness was able to give a description of the older man to a police sketch artist and was able to describe the man's vehicle and scars he had on his arm. 10 years later, in 1992, police decided to release the sketch to the public, and law enforcement were then receiving dozens of calls saying the sketch looked just like former policeman, Marv Henry Stevenson. This man had the same scars on his arms that the witness had described. At the time Tony went missing, Marv had only just retired and he was eventually charged with corruption, but the police commissioner, Terry Lewis, refused to approve the inquisition, so the case against Marv never went any further, and this police commissioner himself was charged with 23 counts of perjury, corruption and forgery and was sentenced to 14 years in prison. Marv Stevenson passed away in 2001. Tony's inquest stated that although they had no body, he was declared a victim of homicide and a death certificate was soon issued. 2 more suspects soon came to light, leading investigators to a small cattle town in northwest Queensland, to best friends that had grown up together, Kevin and Johnny. They had grown up in Hughendon. Kevin's ex-partner eventually spoke out against him, saying she was scared of him, and he had told her one time, "Johnny and I have done things together that nobody will ever know about." Johnny's wife had also gone through hell with him. When they were both 17, when Tony Jones had gone missing, Kevin had been an apprentice butcher at the slaughterhouse his father owned, and Johnny had been a boarder at Townsville Grammar School. Kevin had told his partner he cut up someone's body with a bandsaw after the person was murdered by Johnny, and a different ex-partner of Kevin said he had told her he had killed a backpacker that nobody would miss.
Somebody. That was why he was upset.
What did he tell you he'd done?
That he had helped dispose of a body. He said, "I know how to do things properly."
He's from Hughenden that he grew up with, who he always referred to as being one of his best mates.
You almost felt that Eastoff had a hold over Kevin.
I'd noticed that Kevin, to me, his behaviour was different when Johnny was around. So I did ask him one night, what is the hold that Johnny has on him? And he did say that Johnny and I have done things together that nobody will ever know about, drifting in together before he first hit me. He told me that night, if I ever leave him or take his son away, he will track me down and fucking kill me. And he made it clear.
Did you believe him?
Yes. That's why I stayed.
You stayed for 18 years?
Yes.
40 yards. So Kevin Wright told you he cut up the body of an unknown person and that person had been killed by John Eastoff.
Yeah, he said that Johnny had killed this bloke, and Kevin helped him by going to pick up the body, and he took it to the slaughter yards and put it through a bandsaw.
These admissions while he's very drunk.
Yeah, just falling lifeless on the floor and crying and sobbing.
Did Kevin tell you anything about how the person was allegedly killed?
Yeah. He said that Johnny hit him, punched him, and had broke his neck. And Johnny had turned up in the middle of the night, you know, yelling and frantically trying to get Kevin to come and help him. And Kevin helped him by going to pick up the body, and he took it to the slaughter yards and put it through a bandsaw.
Did he say when this happened?
He told me it was when he was 17.
So when Kevin Wright was 17, what year would that have been?
1982.
He told me he'd killed somebody. That was why he was upset. He went on to tell me it was something that he did with Johnny Eastoff.
What did they do then?
Kevin's parents owned the slaughter yards out in Hughenden, which had a burning pit where you would get rid of the carcasses. So I believe they put the body into the burning pits and set it on fire.
On the 3rd of December 1982, around midnight, a clearly distressed woman carrying a toddler in her arms was walking along Mississippi Highway 63 and again near the state border of Alabama, wearing a blue plaid shirt with blue jeans. Passing motorists kept stopping their vehicles and asking the woman if she needed any help, concerned for her distressed state, but she refused all offers of help. Truck drivers began using their CB radios to let other people know of the situation, saying a woman with no shoes on had a toddler in her arms. It wasn't until 2 days later, at 7 a.m., a truck driver spotted the body of a woman face down, floating in the Escatawpa River under a bridge. The truck driver contacted the police, who rushed to the scene, but they were unable to find the body of the grown woman. The authorities then began a full search of the river, and soon, they came across the body of a blonde-haired toddler, face up in the weeds, her body partially submerged in the water. Authorities were able to determine that the toddler had been thrown off of the bridge into the weeds where she had been found, and this area where she was found was not visible to passing motorists, so they knew the body of the woman seen earlier must still be in the river somewhere. So law enforcement dragged the river, hoping to find her body, but this woman's body has never been located. As they searched the river for the woman's body, they managed to find the skeleton of a man only 60 yards away from where the toddler's body was found. This man had been shot dead before his body was thrown off of the bridge into the river, and it was found he had been murdered 6 months earlier, but his murder had no connection to the case. The body of the toddler was taken in for an autopsy, and they found someone had attempted to smother her, and she had actually been alive when she was thrown from the bridge, and she had died from drowning, and they thought it likely she was smothered and thrown into the river by the woman seen carrying her days earlier. Police didn't know the child's real identity, so gave her the name Delta Dawn, and they knew she was around the age of 2. Because they didn't know who the child was, and couldn't find her family, local sheriff's deputy Virgil Moore and his wife Mary and began fundraising and collecting donations from local businesses in their town so they could give the girl a decent funeral and burial, and soon, they were able to bury her in the Jackson County Cemetery. Although the funeral was attended by around 200 people, they still didn't know who she or her family were.
The ice seems to be thawing on a decades-old cold case, a baby found dead in the Escatawpa River in 1982. No one coming forward to claim her remains, but now investigators just may have found her family.
Fox 10 News' Shelby Myers has been doing a lot of investigations on baby Jane Doe, or Delta Dawn as she was also known. And Shelby, you've actually been following this story for years.
Yeah, I have, Byron. And for Jackson County Sheriff's deputies, this was a case no one was giving up on, one that stayed in their minds. And now that perseverance might be paying off with a big break. Now, this is not an actual picture of baby Jane Doe. It's a drawing of what she might have looked like, so we just wanted to make that clear.
I hit a certain point of the bridge, and I could hear a child or a baby crying, top of his lungs, and it's got me down in the water there, or in a boat or something. I didn't know.
A chilling 911 call from a truck driver on a chilly December morning in 1982. It's what sent Jackson County investigators to the Alabama-Mississippi state line. What they found would haunt them for decades. Captain Louis Seaman, just a teen back then, was part of the flotilla unit that responded. It was his first official call.
Overwhelming, I guess you would say, and very heart-wrenching just to know that, you know, it was a kid.
A lifeless blonde baby girl. Initial reports in '82 say she died of drowning. She was given the name Baby Jane Doe as days, months, and years went by without anyone coming forward. But there might be a reason for that. Her body was exhumed in 2008 for DNA. Her case put up all over the internet. And within the last few months, her profile on the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System, or NamUs website, was taken down, leading some to believe she's been identified. So could this be the break? About a month before Baby Jane's profile was taken down, this missing woman's picture went up on the same site. Gwendolyn May Clemons, and her case shares some similarities to Baby Jane's case. There was a possible sighting of Clemons near the state line on December 3rd, 1982. Witnesses told Jackson County deputies they saw a young woman carrying a baby along the interstate.
Police continued trying to find the woman's body and performed numerous searches of the river, but never found anything. They believed that the woman seen carrying the toddler that day had been the child's mother and had either deliberately or accidentally killed the child, then went on to commit suicide. The girl's body was exhumed in 2009 so they could obtain a DNA sample, which was then entered into the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System and the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children databases. No DNA match was found, and it wasn't until 2020, 38 years later, that she was finally identified as 18-month-old Alisha and Heinrich from Missouri, and her mother was named as Gwendolyn Clemons.
But a baby found dead in coastal Mississippi now has a new headstone with her name on it.
Yeah, the 18-month-old was given the name Delta Dawn after she was found in the swamps of the Escatawpa River back in 1982. A few months ago, investigators finally identified her as Alisha Heinrich from Missouri, thanks to some hard work.
There was a ceremony today at her gravesite for that new marker. Shelby Myers was there, and Shelby, you say this really means a lot to some of the dedicated investigators.
Yeah, it really does, Lenise and Byron. They've been able to see this case through, from finding the baby's body in the swamp 38 years ago to identifying her 7 months ago, and today giving her the proper headstone. I spoke to one retired Jackson County deputy who's been praying he would live to see this day.
I said from day one, you know, that I prayed that I would live long enough to find out who she was. And I said, once I know who she is, if I ever do, I said, then I will put a new marker down with her real name, her date of birth, and everything on it, which I did.
A special day for retired Jackson County Deputy Virgil Moore. He was with a crew who found a lifeless baby in the Escatawpa River in 1982. When no one claimed the child, Moore gave the baby Jane Doe a funeral and paid to put this marker on her grave.
I didn't want that Doe on there. I said, just Baby Jane, known only to God, which that will tell you there. She was known only to God for many years.
As decades passed and no one ever claimed the child, the case haunted him. In 2009, it was Moore who asked to exhume the baby's body for DNA testing.
We have identified them both.
The moment he prayed for. This past December, Baby Jane, or Delta Dawn as she had been lovingly called, was identified. Investigators say through a genealogy report, the baby's DNA matched to a family in Missouri. The 18-month-old child was Alisha Ann Heinrich. Today, the headstone Moore bought for her upgraded to this one. On it, Alisha's real name.
They called me and I went to look at it. When I looked at it first time, I couldn't hold it back. It got me.
From online sleuths to the faithful investigators in the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, everyone in Pascagoula and beyond wanted this case solved, and they wanted it bad.
This case was solved and powered with so much love by Pascagoula, by everybody involved, and it's just amazing to see.
University of South Alabama junior Olivia McCarter did too. It was her work with a forensic research service that finally connected the dots.
It is really bittersweet. I'm used to working on cases and they don't have any family anymore, and nobody really cares about them, but it's the complete opposite with Alisha. complete opposite. She's got family in Pascagoula who have always been her family, and then she's got her real family.
And as Olivia and Moore both pointed out to me today, this case is not over. It's still a mystery how Alisha died. Her mother, Gwendolyn Clemons, also went missing in 1982 and has never been found. A person of interest in this case, I'm told, did die. Still, Jackson County investigators say they will not stop until they figure out what happened to this mother and daughter.
After learning of their identities, law enforcement learned that at the time of her disappearance, Gwendolyn had recently got divorced from Alisha's dad and had begun dating a new man. They had been living in Gwendolyn's parents' home in Kansas City and had told her family she was moving to Florida to start a new life, and around the 24th of November 1982, Gwendolyn, Alisha and her boyfriend disappeared. Her boyfriend later returned to Missouri alone. Although he is now deceased, police have said he is now a suspect and a person of interest, and they are now unsure if Gwendolyn is dead or alive, and they are now doubting their original murder-suicide theory based on what they have since learned, and the case of Gwendolyn Clemons and Alisha Heinrich is part of an active investigation. And Gotlib was born in Ukraine on the 5th of May 1971. She and her family moved to Louisville, America in 1980. And was known to speak English and Russian. She was last seen alive on the 1st of June 1983 in the Bashford Manor Mall, a shopping center that was situated across the street from her home. That day, she left the mall sometime between 5:30 p.m. and 6 p.m., taking her bike to ride home. Her bike was found sat outside the Bacon's department store inside the mall. Police questioned around 40 people in connection with her disappearance, and 3 days later, a police dog led police to a ditch and then led police 2 times to the home of Esther Okniansky, the grandmother of Anne's friend Tanya, Tanya being one of the last people to see Anne, but the grandmother told police and had never been to her house before, so police decided the dog had just made a mistake. Local sex offenders were also questioned, but were able to provide authorities with alibis. Sightings of Anne were regularly reported to police, mainly in the neighborhood of Brighton Beach in Brooklyn, New York, and some people started a conspiracy theory that Anne had been abducted by the Soviet government to force her parents into returning to Russia, although this is not believed to be true by the FBI and her parents. Law enforcement's prime suspect is Gregory Oakley Jr., who lived close to the shopping center and only a street away from Anne's house. He previously kidnapped his stepdaughter, injecting her with a sedative. He was charged with attempted murder. In 1983, Gregory stabbed and tried to rape the 13-year-old daughter of a police officer. After he was arrested for this attack, investigators questioned Gregory about Anne's disappearance. He told them he had nothing to do with it, but when he was given a lie detector test, he failed it. It was also proven that on the day she disappeared, he had gone to a cash machine at the Bashford Manor Mall and made a cash withdrawal there less than 2 hours before she went missing, but when shown this, Gregory stated he had gone out of town on a business trip straight after withdrawing this money. He was later sentenced to 30 years in prison but was paroled in 2002 due to medical compassion, and that same year, he passed away from lung cancer. Gregory's old cellmate was interviewed again by police in 2008, and he informed them that Gregory had told him how he had kidnapped Anne and then injected her with the painkiller named Talwin. Authorities decided to give this former cellmate a polygraph test, which he did and passed it. Gregory's ex-girlfriend also said that on the night of her disappearance, Gregory had not gone on a business trip and he had returned home at 11 p.m. and told his girlfriend to wash his clothes. Detectives consider Gregory as their prime suspect.
Disappeared in the summer of 1983. Her mother reported her missing. She was last seen alive at what was then the Bashford Manor Mall. 25 years later, police announced Oakley, who had died years earlier, was responsible for her disappearance, but the little girl has never been found to this day. For the past 3 years, Shay McAllister's been fighting for access to the case records from police. Finally, we're getting them. And Shay, what did you find in this most recent group of documents that just came to you?
Well, we know back in 2008 is when police finally announced they had a suspect in this case. It's the first time public heard the name Gregory Oakley. However, for the first time, we're seeing here through these documents we just got how much police suspected him and how much earlier, Doug, they actually had him on their radar within 7 months of her disappearance.
I think I had every bit of probable cause to make that arrest if he were alive.
2008, 25 years after Ann Gotlib was reported missing, LMPD's lead homicide detective Barry Wilkerson announced the department had proof Gregory Oakley abducted the little girl.
I think I could put together a perfect package with the Commonwealth attorney.
It was the first time police publicly acknowledged Oakley in the case. But according to investigative documents, detectives considered him a suspect as early as January 1984, just 7 months after Gotlib disappeared. According to this document, exchanged between federal agents during the winter months of 1983, special agents developed 3 possible suspects in the Gotlib case. The first was a 26-year-old man from Somerset, Kentucky, who had kidnapped a child and tied them up using shoestrings. The second was a man from Louisville who was under investigation for a child rape. The third was Gregory Oakley. At the time, he was a USDA meat inspector who had recently been arrested in another attack on a young girl in Louisville. Officers were able to rule out Suspect 1 and Suspect 2 using their alibis, and that shifted the focus to Gregory Oakley. The document listed evidence against him, including the location of his house, just 1.5 blocks from Ann Gotlib's, 2 blocks from where she disappeared. He had also been charged with rape 2 years earlier and arrested in another case involving an attack on a little girl that same month. Finally, records show he failed a polygraph when questioned about Ann Gotlib. Investigators needed to learn more, so they began a nationwide search for evidence. Oakley traveled for work, so federal agents launched investigations in every state he visited the year of the abduction, from Charleston, West Virginia, to Fort Worth, Texas, and all across Kentucky. Federal agents looked for evidence of Ann Gotlib or Oakley's possible tie to similar crimes. These records don't show us what the agents found, but he was deemed armed and dangerous. At this time, Oakley was in custody in Jefferson County, arrested on attempted rape and assault charges involving a little girl in Hikes Point. He would be convicted in that case and serve nearly 20 years in prison.
Doug, we've been trying to get these records for years. Now they're giving them to us in batches. So we got a little bit earlier this year, and then we just most recently got another batch here last week.
Was Oakley already in jail when he first came on their radar so many years ago, as you said, just a few days after her disappearance?
Yes, so what actually put him on the radar was the fact that he had been accused and then arrested for attempting to rape another little girl. And that's what got their attention and said, hold on, we need to be looking at this suspect, and he quickly became the main suspect.